The second lecture today is about where I went for my holidays after I'd been to the Bay of Naples. This was a trip in northern Italy, and the advertising for it, I forgot to indicate that I was going to be starting with Turin, Augusta Praetoria. I simply gave you the names of the next two places on the list when the advertising went out. So there is where we're going to be looking at today, the cities of Augusta Praetoria, Alba Pompeo, and Augusta Praetoria. That's the modern cities of Turin, Alba, and Aosta. Just to refresh your memory where Italy is, it shouldn't be particularly, I hope, necessary for this group, but we're going to be looking at the north of Italy. And just a reminder as well that for a large part of the first 700 or 800 years of Roman history, the north of Italy, the north of what's modern Italy, the region that is usually referred to as continental Italy as opposed to peninsular Italy, was inhabited largely by people who were Celts, related to the Gauls on the other side of the Alps in what's now France. So the Romans themselves called that region Cisalpine Gaul. They didn't regard it as being part of Italy at all. So when the Romans had unified the entire Italian peninsula, when they then conquered the Gauls in the north of the peninsula, in the north of the country up to the Alps, they treated that as a separate province, as if it was not part of Italy at all. And they called it the province of Gallia Cisalpina, Gaul on this side of the Alps, as opposed to Gallia Transalpina, Gaul on the other side of the Alps. But that didn't last very long, and they decided to incorporate it into the whole administrative network for Italy as a whole. So you can see that by the time of the Emperor Augustus, the 7 regions that the Italian peninsula had been divided into for administrative purposes, they'd now added Cisalpine Gaul as well, divided it into 4 regions. We're going to be looking at places in region 11, the Transpadana, taking its name from the river Po that runs through the middle of it. It's not very clear on the screen, but the river Po is the major river of Italy. It's not the Tiber, of course, is the most famous, but the Tiber is a fairly miserable river. The Po rises in the Alps up here and flows right across the north of Italy and eventually out into the Adriatic over there. So we're going to be looking at a number of places in the region 11 on or around the river Po. Can you still hear me okay? Okay. The tribes that the Romans encountered in that area, mainly Gauls or Celts, but not entirely. All these ones that are in blue were Celtic tribes of one kind or another, all speaking an Indo-European language, so that they wouldn't be able to speak to Romans in Latin, but they at least belonged to an Indo-European language group. The Ligurians, on the other hand, we don't know much about their language, but it probably was Indo-European, but different from the Celtic languages. The Etruscans to the south, sorry, let's press too fast. The Etruscans down here didn't even speak an Indo-European language. I'm not quite sure what their language is at all. Italy is very unusual in that respect, that it's got a whole range of languages, some of which are not even Indo-European. Greece, on the other hand, is much more unified linguistically. Almost all the different dialects of Greek are just that. They're dialects of Greek, they're all Indo-European. The region we're going to be looking at in this group of towns is mainly in this area up here, where the native population were Celts, the Taurini, who gave their name to Turin, Torino today, and the Salassi up there in the foothills of the Alps. And the reason that I'm talking to you about these places is that I did a walking holiday last year, starting here and following that nice blue line from Ceva up to Alba. So Alba was the Roman town at the end of it, with a splendid little museum, and then several days in Turin itself, and then a trip up to Aosta, Augusta Praetoria up over there. So it is literally what I did in my holidays that I'm talking to you about. And I put on a few places to sort of key it in. Genoa down here, Milan over there, and Geneva's just off the top there. France begins in here in the mountains, Switzerland up there. Again, just keying it in with as Geneva this time. The places we're going to be looking at are Turin there, briefly at Everea, Aosta, Susa, Alba, Aquiterme, and Asti. In practice, I'm not going to get to these last two, so we'll probably end up at Alba. Beginning with Turin, and then we'll go to Everea, mainly because if you want to get to Aosta, the next place, you've got to change trains at Everea, and then we'll go down to Susa, cross to Alba, and at that point probably stop, but in theory I've got the material for Aquiterme there and for Asti. But plenty to be going on with starting with Turin. Turin in Roman time was called Augusta Praetoria, taking its name from the Celtic tribe, the Taurini. The tribe itself is usually referred to as Celto-Ligurian, that's a sort of mixed population, but probably largely Celtic. It was founded by the Romans as a colony, a military colony, not one for poor citizens. Many Roman colonies were poor landless citizens that they gave land in a distant part of the newly conquered territory. In this case, it's a military colony. It's discharged soldiers who were settled there, probably in about 25 BC. And they chose a location, probably there was already an existing Celtic settlement there of some kind, but it's obliterated when the Roman colony is established and a Roman town is actually laid out on the site. It's at the confluence of the rivers Po and Dora that we'll look at in a moment. And they created there a city 800 by 700 metres approximately, so it's quite large, about 56 hectares. That's reflected in the gridded layout that you still see today in central Turin, the region that's called Centro, which was later expanded in the 18th and 19th century, but following the Roman grid. And it's modern Turin is still focused on these two major Roman streets, the Decumanus and the Cardo, eventually dividing up the old central area into four quadrants. Not what we actually saw. This was taken in autumn or winter. When we were there, you could seldom see the mountains, much less the snow on them. But I put this on because the population, the Roman settlers established there, probably people who'd been recruited much further down the Italian peninsula in quite different landscape, now found themselves settled. It's somewhere within sight of huge mountains, capped in snow pretty well all year round. And that would influence the way people thought and behaved, that you've got this alpine environment around you. And another aerial view, that church there is that one there. So we're looking across that way. Here's the Po, coming this way actually, and the Dora, the other river that comes in, so that Turin is at the confluence, so the Dora comes in just, I can't see where it actually comes out, but it's in this bend somewhere. And then what it looks like on Google Earth, on which I've imposed the outline of the Roman town. So you can see that when Turin was expanded in the 17th, 18th century, they continued the grid of the Roman town on all sides, but that is the original Roman town there, and these are the two major thoroughfares that divide it into four quadrants. And here you can see there's the Po, and here's the River Dora coming out to join it there. So it's tucked into the sort of peninsula where the two rivers meet. That's what it looks like without my blue lines round about it, and on the right is the grid of the Roman town itself. You can see it's cut away in the corner up there, as shown there, but otherwise it's not a square, it's a rectangle. It was 800 by 700 metres, I said. And you can pick out the major streets there running between two gates, and another one here running between the other gates. So it's not divided into four equal quadrants, but divided in with the major street being intersected 2/3 of the way along by the cross street. That is in closer detail. And most of the remains of Roman Turin that you see today and that I'm going to be looking at are in this area up here. So we'll start at the major gate, the Porta Palace, sometimes called the Porta Palatina, named after the palace of the kings of this part of Italy in the 19th century. So we'll start at the gate there. We'll look at a bit of the city walls, at the theatre, partly underneath the modern palace, then down to the Porta Decumana over here. Just in more detail, the same thing. There's the major Roman road going up there, and the other one crossing through here. So we're going to start with the gate up there. There it is. You can see it's extraordinarily well preserved. Presumably a lot of the circuit and the gates were well preserved right the way through to the Middle Ages, early modern times, and then as the city began to expand, and with the advent of cannon, these sort of fortifications were of less value. Different kinds of fortifications were required, and you can see that in the layout of Turin. At a later stage, you get these wonderful fortifications that appeared in the 1600s, quite different from the Roman ones. Fortunately, this main gate, the Pocketbrinker Palace, the Porta Palatina, has survived almost in entirety. As you can see, it's concrete with a brick facing, and these multi-angular towers on either side. So we've got two major thoroughfares, two smaller gateways passing through, and then these massive towers, and a wall disappeared on that side, but you can see that the wall continues off there on this side. A detail of two of those gates. So that's detail of these two here. Beautiful little arches picked out in brick facing on the concrete core. And then the wall next to it. The wall itself has been repaired and reconstructed up there in a much later period, but this is the original Roman wall. The core of it is exposed there. It's concrete with a lot of rubble in the mortar. Otherwise, it had a stone facing, just stone set into the concrete, but at regular intervals there's a brick course runs all the way through. It's thought that the brick courses were that it minimised the chances of walls cracking. You know, if a crack appeared, it would only go as far as the brick course, not all the way down the wall. But it's a common feature of Roman walls. The second gate, the Porta Decumana, that's not it. It's tucked away on the other side. This is the front of this building today. You know, it's a splendid 18th century structure, but what we're interested in is the other face of it. So that is that bit there. This is the back of that building now, but it was the front, and it was the Roman gateway. You can see it's these two multi-angular towers, just like the one that we saw a moment ago at the Porta Palatina. The same sort of thing, but the walls on either side long since disappeared. But they've incorporated the gate into this later palace. Probably all four of the main gates of Turin were like that, very similar. The third one has now disappeared entirely, but in 1635 this man did a drawing of it, and as you can see it's very similar to the two we've just looked at. Here's the multi-angular towers on either side, the two major entrances that we saw in the Porta Palatina, and the two smaller ones, one on either side. All completely swept away now, but preserved in this drawing, the so-called Porta Marmorea, or the Pocketbrinker Palace Dextra. Next is the theatre, which you remember from the plan is tucked away in that top right-hand corner. We looked at the first of the big gates is there, and the stretch wall next to it is that bit there. The wall continues. There's a small tower on the wall, then the wall disappears underneath. This is part of the Royal Palace there. And the Royal Palace is built over half of the theatre. In theory, you can wander around it, but in practice, it was all closed off when I was there, so you're just able to take photographs through a fence. That's what it looks like through the fence, with the buildings of the palace in the background. It's now an art gallery and museum, rather splendid museum. And the reconstruction of it, so that bit there, that square there, is approximately that. So the palace today, modern palace, runs over there, obliterating that eastern end of the theatre. But we've got quite a bit of it surviving there that's been excavated and preserved. In the museum, it's well worth going into the palace if you're not particularly interested in the art and the extensive galleries there, which itself is very impressive. But there's a museum in the basement with all the Roman material, including this bronze head. Because it's a military colony, no great surprise that some of the relief decoration is of people who are plainly soldiers. You know, he's clutching the hilt of his sword there, and I'm not entirely sure what these things are. Quite often you find soldiers holding these things. I mean, it used to be a joke, you know, that it's actually the lunch basket, but I'm sure that's not the case. And in this case, the soldier is presumably a cavalryman because we've got the head of his horse there. So there's a lot of that. I'm just showing you a few samples of dozens and dozens of pieces in the basement. An inscription on the left and some more of this relief decoration on the right. I've picked out this particular inscription because you can make out the man's name. So I'll try and read it off here. He's Gaius Valerius, that's the first line. And then CF, that means he's the son of Gaius. Stellatina, that's the name of the voting tribe to which he as a Roman citizen belonged. And then the final part of his name, Clemens. So he's Gaius Valerius Clemens, the son of Gaius of the tribe Stellatina. But then it goes on to tell us what he did for a living. He was Primi Pilaris, leg 3 Sivan. He was the first centurion, and there's 60 centurions in the legion. He's the one who's clawed his way right to the top. He's number 1. He's the primus pilus, the first centurion in the legion. And the legion in question is the 3 Cyrenaica, which was based at Bostra, what is in now southern Syria. So he ends up dying here in Turin, but he'd previously been the lead centurion of this legion. The men who reached that position were the ones who'd, well, you just had to live long enough to some extent. You know, the high attrition rate in the Roman army, but you clawed your way up from being maybe the number 58 to number 43 to number 32. And eventually, if you were really talented or lucky or knew the right people, you'd make it to being the primus pilus, the first centurion. It was a post you only held for 1 year. When you got there, you held it for just 1 year. You were paid about 50 times what a ranker was paid. It was, effectively you were moving into a different social category entirely. And some of these people then went on to have a civil career as a junior aristocracy. So here's Gaius Valerius Clemens from Turin, who'd served in the province of Arabia at the far end of the Mediterranean, and he'd clawed his way right to the top in that legion. I won't try and read this one off because helpfully it's set out there for you on the right, but it's another one of these inscriptions to one of the local worthies. Gaius Gavius Silvanus, the son of Lucius of the tribe Stellatina. Again, this is the tribe to which most of the settlers at Turin belonged. Again, he's a primus pilus, he's the lead centurion, primi pilari legionis 8 Augusta, so a different legion. This one, if I remember right, was on the Danube. But then he goes on, unlike the previous man who says that he became the lead centurion of the Legion 3 Cyrenaica, this man, that was just really the beginning of his really important career, because after that he went on to be a tribune of the cohors 2 Vigilum, and I think I've got an English translation of it all down below there. Gaius Gavius Silvanus, son of Lucius, member of the Stellatina tribe, chief centurion of the Legion 8 Augusta, tribune of the 2nd Watchman's Court. So he went to Rome after he'd served in the Legion 8 Augusta, where he was a tribune of one of the paramilitary fire brigade cohorts. And having served there, he then went on to being a tribune of the 12th urban cohort. This is the paramilitary police force for Rome. He wasn't finished yet. He went on after that to being a tribune of the 12th Praetorian cohort, so the household guard of the emperors, the Praetorian Guard. He goes on to be one of the 12 tribunes of the Praetorian Guard. But he had a sort of high point in his career as well that he notes here. He goes on to say that he was rewarded with gifts by the deified Claudius for the war in Britain, with neck rings, armbands, medallions, and with a gold crown. In other words, at one point during his career, probably while he was the chief centurion of the Legionate Augusta, he joined the Emperor Claudius's expedition that resulted in the annexation of Britain as a province. This inscription is being set up after AD 54 because Claudius is described as Divo Claudio. He's the deified Claudius, he's dead. So sometime after 54, this man sets up this inscription. But he records, that in the course of this expedition, he was given all these decorations, for presumably his heroism. He ends up in Turin, which is presumably his hometown. That wasn't the end of his career, however. That he committed suicide because he got caught up in a conspiracy in the time of the Emperor Nero, the so-called Pisonian conspiracy. He escaped execution. He was sort of suspect, but he wasn't one of those who was put to death by Nero, but he decided to kill himself soon afterwards. So sometime between 54, when Claudius had died, so that he refers to him as Divo Claudio, and his own death in AD 65. That's recorded in the historian Tacitus. Masses of material been excavated there. They've just put a collection of it in cases in the museum, all this fine red glassware, terra sigillata or samian. Lots of glass. More glass was produced in the first 2 centuries of the Roman Empire than was produced elsewhere in Europe, right the way through until early modern times. They churned it out. It was almost industrial, the scale in which they produced it, and presumably on such a scale that it was relatively cheap. People quite low down the social scale could buy glass vessels. So that was Turin. We're now moving to Everea, which is where you change the train to get up to Aosta. I just put it on briefly. I haven't actually seen either of the structures there. I only discovered that they were there after I got back from this trip, and discovered that virtually every little town around Turin has got its Roman origins and got something substantial and Roman in it. However, at Everea, the ancient Roman town of Eperedia, it's about 45 kilometres north of Turin, and it's on the main route towards Aosta to take you across the Great St Bernard Pass into Gaul on the other side. Like a lot of the towns in this area, it was probably founded as a colony to secure movement across the Alpine passes. Very little survives in the town as you see it today. There's what it looks like on Google Earth. The main part of the ancient town is in here. There's a theatre we know of, and an amphitheatre well outside the town. Amphitheatres were usually put outside Roman towns because of their association with gladiators who might revolt, and wild beasts, and the sort of feeling that this place was had a sort of connotations of being an abattoir. So the theatre and the amphitheatre. The theatre, virtually nothing to see except looked at from above. You can see that part of it is preserved in the curve of the houses there, built on top of it. The rest of it has been reconstructed from work that's been done in the basements of some of these buildings, or when streets have been taken up. The amphitheatre is much better preserved. It's far out to the east of the town. Most of the circuit is preserved, and when excavations were done there, it was found that the amphitheatre overlies a much earlier villa. There'd been a luxury villa on the site, dated to the mid to late 1st century AD. So the amphitheatre is after that. The amphitheatre is late 1st century AD or 2nd century. It's thought they've had seating for about 10 to 15,000. Moving right along, we're heading to Aosta, up at the top left-hand corner there. The view you get as you come up into these alpine passes, beyond Aosta you're getting into where the Great St Bernard and the Little St Bernard come down together. So it's at a key point for controlling movement across these major passes over the Alps. Although it's part of Italy, it's almost entirely French-speaking today. It was part of the French kingdom for much of the last 1,000 years. So unsurprisingly, the population are largely still French-speaking. There was officially Augusta Praetoria, and it was again established as a colony for retired soldiers, but in this case, not just any old retired soldiers, it was for retired members of the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's household troops. This is how they appear on relief decoration. They wore deliberately archaic equipment. These were not the sort of equipment that contemporary Roman legionaries wore on the frontiers. This was the sort of equipment of perhaps 100, 200 years before. It's a bit like you still find in Europe, where the people guarding Buckingham Palace are wearing, busbies and red jackets, that have not been in fashion for the British military for 150 years. So it's the same sort of thing. And here's some of the standard bearers of the Praetorian Guard here on another monument. So these are the people who were settled there as colonists. The plan has not come out terribly well, but you can perhaps make out, there's the colony in the middle there, some of the roads coming into it, the location of the cemeteries that have been identified, the river down here with another one coming in. This is the River Dora that eventually comes out to join the Po at Turin that we saw in an earlier picture. And the thing to note in this case, there's an amphitheatre there, but it's not outside as we saw in the previous site at Everea. It's actually inside the circuit of the walls. That's very unusual. The amphitheatres are almost invariably outside the walls. The major roads dividing it into almost identical quadrants. 3,000 Praetorian discharged soldiers settled there, so it's a military colony rather than one for poor citizens, landless citizens. It's a bit smaller than Turin. Turin, if you remember, it was 56 hectares. This one's about 41 hectares. The walls don't survive particularly well anywhere, but where they do survive, they were at least 10 metres high, so very substantial. 20 towers, intervals around the walls, and the whole of the interior divided up into 16 major blocks. "16 is plainly not right. So I can see 4 times 16. 64 blocks. There's the details anyway, and the features we're going to look at in a little bit more detail because there's evidence surviving there are the theatre, the amphitheatre, the Porta Praetoria, and the Forum, and the Arch of Augustus, which is way out to the east here. So that bit, that bit, and then we'll look outside. Again, it's got a lot of these little Italian towns seem to have wonderful museums. They're sort of tucked away somewhere, and they're well worth visiting because they've got such a rich heritage in these places that what they put on display in the museum is often just the tip of a huge iceberg of material that they've got in the basements. There's a model that they have in the museum, and we're going to be looking at the amphitheatre and the theatre and the Porta Praetoria there, and then we'll look at the Forum. But you can see the circuit of the walls with its 20 towers, major gates there and there and there. One of the towers have been much modified and repaired over the years, but essentially still capturing the character of it from Roman times, and a bit of the adjoining wall. This is all modern brick, of course. This is what the facing of the wall would have looked like. Just a little to the east of that tower, here's part of the wall there, but the stone facing, this sort of facing has disappeared, and you're just looking at the concrete and rubble core. Out to the east is the Arch of Augustus, very well preserved, as you can see, and just beyond it is a Roman bridge still surviving over the river that comes down to join the Dora. The amphitheatre, not very much to see there, but again, it's the houses on top that have preserved the part of the circuit of the amphitheatre down below. And the artisan impression in this model of what it originally looked like. So that bit there is this bit here where there's modern buildings on top. So not very much to be seen there. Much more of the theatre survives. Most of this has disappeared, it's just foundations. But this roofed theatre, very unusual, but perhaps not unexpected in the foothills of the Alps. A roofed theatre there. A lot of it survives, and most of the Porta Praetoria survives, and that Arch of Augustus is out that way. Here it is in Google Earth with the amphitheatre there, the theatre there. I've turned the angle round, so this is north in that direction. Sorry, the rectangle wasn't supposed to come through onto this picture, but there's part of what survives of the theatre. You can see it still stands to a remarkable height, one of the walls of it. Elsewhere, most of it is simply foundation, but one of the walls of this roof theatre still stands to the equivalent of sort of 4 or 5 stories there. And again, in the artist's impression, it would have been like that around all 4 sides, with the theatre and the seating inside, and then the roofing that you saw in that model added. And a reconstruction of what the surviving bit of the wall and what survives behind it. The forum's rather sad, almost all of it has disappeared under modern buildings. What we've got is the substructures for underneath this bit here, so that although all of this on the surface has disappeared, the 2 temples there have disappeared, you can go downstairs here and wander around these immense corridors that were built underneath it. So that bit is that bit there. And here's the corridors you go down into that you can walk around underneath. That's what they look like. Amazing bit of construction just for the substructures of the forum. Elsewhere in the museum, evidently many of the people in the town not only had fine houses, but they had nice decorations on the walls, including this rather nice piece of painted plaster, one of a number of pieces in the museum. They've done a reconstruction of what one of the taverns would look like, complete with a sort of graffiti on the front to tell you what they sold, or who was standing for election that year. So that was Augusta. We're moving down now to Susa here. I haven't been to Susa, so I know it only from doing research for this lecture today. It's about 50 kilometres west of Turin. Again, it's on the River Dora. It's in the territory of the Ligurian Celtic chieftains, and we know of it from a Roman literary source tells us that it was ruled by a man who they call King Donus, who'd originally contested Roman control when they initially advanced into this area. Then he decided better to join them than try and fight them. So he threw in his lot with the Romans. They recognised him as king. The Romans gave his son Roman citizenship, so he's officially Marcus Julius Cottius, a name that's still preserved in the Cottian Alps just to the west. So the family came out of this quite well by throwing in their lot with the Romans at the right time. And there's an important arch of Augustus there, which has a huge dedicatory inscription on it. There's the arch. And the inscription has been rather badly damaged, but there it is. It's quite extensive, as you can see. The bottom bit's the English translation, Marcus Julius Cottus. So this is the son of the man who threw in his lot with the Romans. He's been given Roman citizenship. He's been given the citizenship by the emperor, so he's Marcus Julius. It's the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Son of King Donus, leader of the following community. So he proceeds to tell us that all the Celtic tribes in this area that he was actually the king of. I won't run through them, though. All the names are listed for you there. He says, and the aforementioned communities who were under this man's leadership dedicated this arch to the Emperor Caesar Augustus. Son of a god, Pontifex Maximus, awarded tribunician power 15 times and acclaimed imperator 13 times. So this man's, he's a Celt, but he's thrown in his lot with the Romans, and he's done this very Roman thing of building a triumphal arch, dedicating it to the ruling Emperor Augustus. Moving on still in Susa. This is modern Segusio. The other thing that survives there is this immense gateway. The walls on either side have disappeared, but you can see they've got these huge circular towers and an arched gateway. So even this little place that I can't say that I'd ever actually heard of it until I started researching it a few weeks ago, has got these huge remains there, a triumphal arch of Augustus and this gateway that was presumably one of four and part of an entire wall circuit. So almost every one of these little Italian towns is worth having a look at a little bit more closely, because even after 99% of it's been lost, what is still there is often very substantial. It tells you a great deal about the sort of cultural pretensions of the place in Roman times. It also has an amphitheatre. Here's a fragment of it there. So this native Celtic Ligurian king, who's been made king and given Roman citizenship, he starts doing all these very Roman things. He builds Roman walls, Roman gateways, Roman towers, and an amphitheatre, a very Roman thing to do, and a triumphal arch dedicated to the emperor. So that's Susa. We're moving on finally to Alba. Now you can pick out in this case where the Roman town is. It's largely still preserved. It's hexagonal, as we'll see in the plan in a moment, but there it is there. Of course, it's extended out quite considerably on the other side, particularly down in that direction. Do you know what Alba's famous for, apart from... Ever heard of it before? It was officially Alba Pompeo. It's still called Alba today. It's the headquarters of Ferrero. Nutella? It's where they make all the hills all round about are covered in hazelnut trees, for making Nutella. So Ferrero has its headquarters there, and you've probably eaten the chocolates if you haven't eaten the Nutella. There's the plan of it there. You can see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, so it's 8-sided. One of the gates has been partly preserved. This is largely a construction on the basis of the foundations that have been excavated there. Again, unexpectedly, it's got a splendid little museum. Lots of wonderful things in it, including this, what was presumably a rather expensive dedication. Decoration on all sides. This is the inscription on the front, and there's a parallel decoration on the other side and on the back. And there's what it says on the left. While living, vivus fecit, while living he made it. So Gaius Camillus, the son of Gaius of the tribe Camilia. So he's Gaius Camillus Germanus, there's the rest of his name. And then who his father was, is tucked away in the middle, as was common. He has a largely civil career in this little town of Alba. He was aedile, quaestor, duoer, praefectus fabrum, iudex, and then he goes on to be flamen divi Augusti. He became a priest of the divine Augustus. So there was a temple to the Emperor Augustus there, and this man was one of the priests. So he erected this. He had this set up, this dedication made to himself and to, while living, the vivus fecit, to himself and to Valeria, the daughter of Marcus, Valeria Marcella, the daughter of Marcus, his best of wives. So it's very nicely inscribed, as you can see. Sometimes, rather amusingly, you find that the man who's been given the job of cutting it, he may have not been literate. He's simply been given, he cuts it just really as a pattern. He sort of follows the lines he's been shown, and he doesn't mark it out properly, so that some of the lines disappear off to the right into the decoration, or he has to start squeezing the letters in at the end to make them fit. But this one is perfectly laid out, nicely symmetrical. The museum's also got these reconstructions of some of the graves that have been excavated with the grave goods in them. The cases, the cases in the museums stuffed with glassware largely from the graves. Most glass that survives intact survives in graves, not as, on excavations themselves, you're usually just finding bits of broken glass. A lot of glass that people broke it in everyday use that would be melted down. It was something you send for recycling. But if you were putting it in as an offering in a grave, that's when the vessels tend to survive. So almost all of these almost certainly came from graves, including this rather fancy one in the background there. And finally, the other reason that Alba Pompeo is famous is that it was the home of the Emperor Pertinax. He was a short-lived emperor. He was emperor for 6 months, but he came from this town. A modern bust of him has been set up there, just behind somebody rather less famous. And his significance isn't just that he lasted such a short time. This is after the assassination of the Emperor Commodus. Pertinax was declared emperor, and he's emperor for just 6 months before he too is murdered. But his father had been a slave. So he's from extremely humble backgrounds. His father had been a slave, been freed, had gone on then to have a very significant career as a freedman, and his son wouldn't have the stigma of having ever been a slave or a freedman. His son is able to rise to the very highest ranks. He'd been an important general under the Emperor Commodus, and then when Commodus is assassinated, people sort of naturally looked to him as one of the handful of people who were worthy to succeed Commodus. They quickly changed their mind, but for a short time, for 6 months, he looked like the likely bet. And I think that was the last one. There he is on his coins. The last 2 or 3 places are ones I've not been to, but another lecture perhaps, because I think we've reached the point where I should draw a halt. I seem to be going a bit hoarse as well. Thank you very much. If you've got any questions, I'll try and answer them. Does anybody have any questions? Wonderful. Okay. Sorry, there's.
Putting veterans the Praetorian Guard on the borders.
Sorry?
Putting the veterans the Praetorian Guard on the borders.
Sorry, I'll have to come closer.
Putting the veterans of the Praetorian Guard out towards the borders. Was that for a defense, or was it also because they weren't in Rome to endanger the next emperor?
Yeah. I can't think of anywhere else where we find Praetorians being established outside Italy as colonists. Just offhand, I mean, usually the military colonies were on the frontiers and they were ex-legionaries. This is the only place I can think of in which it's actually Praetorians. Perhaps it was felt that these chaps really wouldn't like to be sent to the provinces. You better keep them within Italy somewhere, close enough to the flesh pots. And at this stage, when they're being settled there in about 25 BC, most Praetorians would have been Italian. Within 50 or 60 years, a lot of Praetorians were from the provinces. They were the sons of Germans and Gauls and Syrians and Egyptians and so on. But at this stage, these people would have been largely Italian. So presumably, when it was decided to settle them in a colony, it was felt that it was wise to settle them somewhere where they were not going to be upset by the suggestion. They've been sent to some fine agricultural land in a rather pleasant bit of the peninsula, but still within Italy, as it was by then.
Question. I'm interested in the shape of those towers with all those sides. Would there be a defensive reason for that, or is it strictly just ornamentation?
Late Roman fortifications like that tend to be very elaborate and very varied. It's almost as if they're experimenting with different shapes, not just square or rectangular, but circular, 4 sides, 5 sides, 6 sides. Some of those ones we saw at Turin, I didn't count the sides, but it looked like there's maybe 12, 16 faces on it. There probably was some reason to do with, they weren't facing people who had artillery. The Romans had artillery that could fire large stones against walls, but they're not facing people who were capable of doing that. The Goths and the Huns and so on, didn't have that sort of equipment. So I can't really see it in terms of them having sort of multiple faces, to sort of make stone glance off, when they were fired at it. I don't know the answer is the short. Sorry?
Aesthetic and defensive.
Possibly to some extent. It's quite sometimes you do find that, as we see them today, you're just looking at the brick face concrete, but occasionally you've got fragments surviving of what was on top of the bricks, and they were intended to be impressive. The people approaching them were intended to say, "Wow, it's not just big, but this is really impressive." There's some marble cladding on them, and they've got access to cheap marble, so you can put on marble shielding, and at least in parts of a gateway. So yeah, how it looked mattered, I think.
Thank you.
Yes.
With the Puteoli amphitheatre, did you say you could visit that?
Yes.
Yes, can you go underneath?
Yes. Yes, I took those photos in the basement. As I said, there was only 2 other people there. There's a little museum, some pitifully small sum to get in, €1 or something to get in, and it's got a fine collection of architectural pieces, inscriptions in the courtyard of the amphitheatre. And if you go round to the far side of it and go about 20 yards up the road, there's a splendid little pizza place as well. Yeah. Best to go there first. Anything else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just looking at all the buildings and things, and what seems strange to me is how they've lasted for thousands of years, and yet now we're struggling to get structures to last 10 years.
Yeah, most of what was there in Roman times, whether it's at Puteoli or Turin or Augusta, the vast majority, 99% is gone. There may be foundations there under the modern buildings, but the structures above ground have largely gone. They've been demolished deliberately. The stone's been looted from them for other building. It's like Hadrian's Wall. Most of Hadrian's Wall is still there in the north of England, but it's in the farmhouses round about. People have stolen the stone and built their farms out of it. It's only in the central sector where there's not many farms that the wall survives. Roman concrete is very durable. Even when the facings are stolen, the bricks or the masonry on the facings, the core of the walls survives. Is very strong. So, yeah, they were good builders. Anything else? Okay, I don't know when our next lecture is. I did ask the secretary before I came, but he said we haven't decided on a date yet. I think it's in about 5 or 6 weeks' time. But our circular will come out to you telling you when the next Saturday lectures are. Okay, thank you.